Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. In this video, we're going to go over the switch statement together in JavaScript. This is another neat bit of syntax that kind of allows us to condense if-else statements into kind of a shorter, neater, more compact syntax in certain cases. And it's just a nice tool to add to our tool belt, where in certain cases where we might see this come up and be useful, we can actually reach out for it instead of a regular if-else statement. Let's get right into it. Okay, so a lot happening on this screen right away. So as usual, I just kind of want to focus our attention on this left half of the screen to start, where we're looking at the conditional statement. So over here, I kind of have a regular if-else statement where I have an animal that is a monkey, and I'm kind of doing a regular if, else if statement. In this case, I don't actually have an else case because I want to show that later. But this is totally valid in JavaScript. We can have an if, else if case in JavaScript. So here we're saying, is animal monkey, then kind of do this thing over here. If it's tiger, then do this thing over here. And if it's sloth, finally do this last thing. Otherwise, kind of don't do anything, right? So we're only going to execute one bit of code inside of this if, else if block. As soon as the first thing executes, we're going to kind of jump out of this if, else if block and continue running the rest of our JavaScript code. Now, there is a new bit of syntax, as I hinted at, called the switch statement, which comes in handy in scenarios like this. Now, one caveat I do want to add is that the switch statement only works, or I should say works best with primitive types in JavaScript. Okay, so we have a whole video on what primitive types are, but for example, things like strings or booleans or numbers usually is what you'll see them used with. Okay, it technically in certain scenarios might work with other types, reference types. However, generally speaking, most of the use cases with switch statements, especially to be less confusing, is used with things like strings as well as numbers. However, even with those cases, there are certain limitations that we need to be aware of. So with that in mind, let's kind of take a look at how we would change the code on the left to this code on the right here with the switch statement. So this is the same logic. We have an animal, which is starting as monkey, but then we're actually going into a switch statement. So the way the switch statement works is it kind of is what it sounds like. It kind of switches between these different cases, is what they're called, and tries to find the first matching one. Okay, so we need to tell the switch operator what to switch on. So here we're asking it to switch on the animal variable, which is monkey. So it's going to try to match that to any of our cases. Okay, and we have to surround it with brackets just like this, and then we can start our switch block where our cases are contained within. Within the actual switch block, we're allowed to have as many cases as we want. However, each case can only deal with one value at a time. We can have an expression here, and we can get quite fancy with these. However, I suggest really keeping it simple to one value at a time. I'll show you how we can deal with multiple values shortly. So in this case, we're saying, is animal monkey? If it is, then kind of run this code. Okay, console log, that is my favorite too. What you'll notice is I have an interesting bit of syntax here, which is the break keyword. We saw these with loops, and it works the exact same way with a switch statement. The break keyword will actually jump out of the outer curly brackets of the switch to the rest of the code that comes after the switch block. Now, for now, we're just going to involve it in every single case statement, and I'll show you what happens if we leave it out later. Okay, so in this case, we're switching on three possible cases, monkey, tiger, and sloth, which correspond to the three cases over here with the if, else if block. Okay, and each of the cases has their own break to jump out. All right, now one thing to note with the syntax, we'll see this as we code this in a second, but it's a case and then the actual thing that we're trying to match to animal in this case, or to match inside of the switch block up here. And then we have a colon and then the actual block. Now you'll see some people not include the kind of curly brackets here that you see after the colon. And in some cases that's totally fine. However, I would highly encourage you to include these blocks after the colon, because once we start looking at things like scoping, which we'll get into in future videos because it's quite complex, a lot of bugs can happen if you kind of try to use variables in different funky ways inside of these blocks and think that they might be one thing or another. So for now, I encourage you to actually follow the same syntax that I have here, which is use a block after the colon and then have the actual code you want to execute and then break out. Okay. However, you will see code without those blocks and it will be treated potentially the same and potentially differently. Okay, so that said, let's just look at the code for this and get right into it. So I'll just pull up Visual Studio Code and I'll say intro.js for this so that we can take a look at the switch statement. So I'll go with the kind of the same animal because I love my monkeys, as you know. So I'll say const animal equals monkey. So the way the switch block works is we're going to say switch. We're going to open some regular parentheses and we're going to ask JavaScript to switch on this variable, which is going to be the string monkey. Okay, so you can think of as doing behind the scenes, what JavaScript is going to do is replace it with this. Okay, so we're switching on monkey. Then what we want to do is write a bunch of cases. Okay, so we can have like case and then the thing that we want to match with. So for example, let's say if I have tiger up here, I'm going to do a colon, and then I'm going to do a set of curly brackets, like I said, for a block, which is my recommendation. Then what I want to do, then what I want to do inside that case, sorry. So I'm going to say you are a tiger. Okay, and then I'll break in the case to break out of this actual case block. And I'll show you what happens if you don't have a break, because this might seem a bit redundant, but there actually is a very, very difference in behavior if we don't actually have this break here within our cases. So I'm going to kind of list out another case here. I'll just say my next case is monkey. And for my monkey case, I want to console.log out the best animal. Okay, very, very subjective, obviously. And then I'm going to break out of that. And I'll just leave it at that for sake of example. All right, so if I execute this code, let's actually see what ends up happening. So I'm going to open up my terminal here, make sure I'm in the correct folder, and I'm going to run node intro.js. What we'll see is the best animal, right? I totally agree. And what's happening is we are switching on animal, which is actually the string monkey, right? And the casing does matter here, right? So capital M in my case. It's actually going to check this case first, right? It's going to say, is tiger equal to monkey, basically. That's what it's going to ask. And it's not. So it's going to skip it. Then it's going to check this case here. It's going to say, is monkey equal to monkey? And it is, right? So then it's going to enter everything after the colon here, which we have a block of code, and it's going to execute our console log and then our break. If I have some code down here after, I'll put, for example, all done, and I rerun this statement. What we'll see is the best animal and then all done. Okay, so we're not going to see you are a tiger. If I change this to monkey, for example, in lowercase, right, and I rerun this code, we're just going to see all done because lowercase monkey is not equal to either of these cases, tiger or monkey with an uppercase starting letter. All right, hopefully that's pretty clear. Cool. So let's take a look at the flow for a switch statement, because I think visualizing this is probably the most important thing. So when we have a switch statement, we're actually running code from top to bottom, very similar to kind of conditional statements with if, else blocks. We're starting at the top and we're kind of going top down. Okay, so in this case, say we have animal, which is tiger, and we switch on animal. We're first going to check this case, right? We're going to say, is tiger equal to monkey? Because that's the case that we're checking first. It's not, right? So we're going to skip that entire case. We're going to find the next case. Then we're going to say, is tiger equal to tiger? And it is equal to tiger, right? So we're going to execute all the code after the colon, after the tiger case. In this case, console log wow so fierce, and then we're going to hit break. When JavaScript sees a break in a switch, it acts very similar to a loop. It's actually going to jump out of the entire switch block, right? And this is the switch block right here, right? Starting and ending curly brackets, right? This starting curly bracket, this ending curly bracket. Then we're going to jump out to the code after the switch, right? So I had all done, for example, printed in my outside the switch case code. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense when you see a visual like this. And we'll see again shortly what happens when we take out the break. Now, one thing we might want to do is have an kind of else block. Okay, if you think about how this works right now, what if we have something that's not a monkey, not a tiger, and not a sloth, but we still want to do something in that case, right? With a regular conditional statement, what we could do is have an else, which is kind of like a catch-all block that actually catches everything that doesn't match the above if, else if, or if, else if blocks, right? So in switch statements, we can have the same behavior. And in a switch statement, we have a default block. Okay, so it's not called else, it's called default. And this goes in the same spot that a case might go, but it doesn't really have a tag beyond it, right? It's just a default. Just like an else doesn't have a condition after it, we don't match on anything. The default just happens in the case that everything else fails. Okay, now I should probably mention here that default usually comes last. In theory, you can put this default block somewhere else. However, the behavior of that is very, very funky and not intuitive at all. Would highly not recommend you ever do that. I can't really think of any scenario where that would be a good idea. If you're interested in what happens in funky cases like that, you can take a look at MDN, but it's not really worth covering in this video because you should always put default at the bottom after all your cases. Treat it just like you would an else. So that said, let's take a look at this example. We have kangaroo as our animal. We're switching on kangaroo here. Okay. Kangaroo is not monkey, so we skip this. Kangaroo is not tiger, so we skip this. I actually realized I forgot to get rid of my green here, so please ignore that. We are not executing this code. We're going to execute the default code. We're skipping sloth, and then we're going to go find default. Now we're going to hit default. And because we didn't match any of the other cases above us, we're actually going to execute the default case. Okay, and in this case, we're going to console log 404 animal not found. Okay, we still have a break here, and since default is the last, it's just best practice to always include a break. Technically speaking, you don't need a break because it will jump to after whatever is default, but just to match the other cases, I would highly recommend you put a break in every single one of your cases, including the default case. All right, and then we would go to the code after the switch. Perfect, so let's take a look at how that might work. So let's use this same example here where I have my animal equal to monkey, right? And let's say that in this case, you saw that when I ran this with lowercase monkey, I just had all done being printed out because uppercase monkey is different from lowercase monkey. So what I can do is I can add a default case here, and default doesn't have a matching statement according to it because it's just the else clause. Very similar to how else doesn't have a condition for it. It doesn't make sense for a default to have a condition because it's just a catch-all that catches everything that was missed in the earlier case blocks. So let's add a block of code here, and I'll just say console.log, and then I'll just say must be something else. Okay, and I'll put a break here, as I mentioned, just for good practice. Now, if I run this with a lowercase monkey example, just if you remember that, right? So we don't have a capital M. What we'll see is that we get the default case, which is must be something else, right? Because we're not matching tiger, we're not matching capital monkey, and then we hit the default case. So default's going to catch absolutely everything. Okay. If you think about how this might work, for example, even if I put like a 1 here, right, I'll still hit the default case, right? Now, best practice is really to make sure your typing is correct, but in theory, you can see how that might work as well. Okay, one other thing to probably mention is that these cases use strict equals, so you can imagine it using equals, equals, equals to actually do these comparisons. Now, hopefully that makes sense for the default case. Very, very powerful now, as you can see, because we can actually catch every single possible case, including the cases where it doesn't match the above cases. Super useful. Okay. Now to show you something a bit funky, which is probably at the back of your mind. What do we do in the case where we want to match multiple things to a single block of code? So I want you to check this out. I removed some other like arrows and things on here just to keep it a bit simpler and more concise, since I think you get the point now. We have the same kind of switch block. We have animal being kangaroo. We're switching on kangaroo as a string. Kangaroo is not equal to monkey, so we skip this case. Kangaroo is not equal to tiger, but if you look at this case block right here, there's something weird about it, right? We have case tiger, colon, and then immediately after another case, we have case kangaroo, colon, right? So this looks kind of like a typo or a bug, but this is actually a behavior in switch statements that allows us to match on multiple matches at the same time. So if you think about how this might work, we're not going to match on tiger, but we're immediately going to check the next case right after. Okay, and what's going to happen is in both the tiger and the kangaroo case, this block of code right here, the green one, is going to execute. Wow, so fierce. Okay. And in this case, since we have a break, we jump outside the code and we don't execute any more code after that block. Okay, I just gave a hint as to what might happen if we don't have a break in there. All right, so let's take a look at this in action. This is, if you think about how this might work, this might be very similar to like in an if statement if we said if animal is equal to tiger or animal is equal to kangaroo, right? If we had like that exact phrase, or we did an else if animal equal tiger, else if animal equal kangaroo, and we just duplicated this code in there, right? So this is probably better expressed as the or case. Okay, if it's this or this, then do this code. Okay, let's take a look at this. So I'll just continue this example just because hopefully you can see the flow of how things go. So let's say that I want to match on another animal, like let's say the koala. Okay, and I want both koala and monkeys to print out the best animal. You only really have one best animal, but for this example, let's just say that we can't make up our mind. So I can actually add another case here, right? And I can say koala. If I can spell koala, koala, there you go, and then a colon. Oops, and I put the colon in the wrong spot. All right, so if I just split this up just a tiny bit, just so you can kind of see a bit more clearly what's happening. This case is effectively going to also match this case, right? So if we don't hit koala, we're immediately going to check monkey. But if we do match koala, we're effectively going to what's called like fall through kind of to the case monkey as well. So koala and monkey can be thought of to have the same kind of matching block. Okay. So if I run this, let's just put this as, let's say koala to start, conky, koala. Thought I could just replace one character from monkey to get to koala. That's pretty funny. I'll get the best animal, right? So what's happening here is we're missing tiger. We're hitting case koala and then falling through to monkey and then running this code and then breaking out and then hitting all done. Okay, and if I do monkey here, what we'll see is the exact same result, the best animal. But if I see tiger, then I'll actually just match the first case and I'll get my you are a tiger printed out. Okay, and if I make this anything else, like say lowercase tiger, then I'm going to hit my default case. Okay, so very, very useful. You can have as many of these in a row as you like. Since you can't do complex real expressions in here, what the best thing to do is just to kind of list out all of the possible cases one after the other. Now you can imagine there's definitely a place where an if else might work better than this. For example, ranges of numbers are much better expressed in an if else block, as you can imagine you listing out all the numbers between one and another, one after the other like this would be very, very cumbersome. But in cases like this, it's very, very useful. And there actually turns out to be many, many cases in JavaScript where this switch statement is probably the preferred method because of just how clear it is as to what is happening. Okay, perfect. Now, to kind of finish this off, I want to show you one more thing, which is probably the question at the back of all your minds right now, which is what on earth is this break? Right? What if we don't have that break in there? Why is it so annoying? Why do we have to include it all over the place in these blocks, right? So that's the idea of falling through. Okay? So let's take a look at this example since it can be quite complex. We have everything that we've learned so far kind of mixed into one example. We still have our animal being kangaroo, and we're switching on kangaroo. Now, kangaroo is not equal to monkey, so we skip this one. Kangaroo is not equal to tiger, but kangaroo is equal to kangaroo. So now what happens is we found our first match. But since there's no break statement here, the code actually just continues executing from that point down. Okay, so I'll say that one more time. If in a switch statement we find a match, we just continue executing all the code from that match downwards. That's the same kind of rationale for why this works, right? If you really think about it. So that's why we need a break, because if we don't have a break, that break doesn't pop us out of the switch statement and we just continue executing the rest of the switch cases, even if they don't really match because we've hit our first match. Okay, this might seem strange, but definitely important behavior to take notice of because it's a bug that can happen a lot of the time if you're not careful with putting breaks in the right spot. So let's take a look at how this might work. So let's just say I forget to put a break for tiger. In fact, I'll actually just comment it out. Okay. So you can see that my other cases do have a break. Koala and monkey are still pointing to the same block of code and they do have a break. Default also has a break, but tiger does not. Okay, so let me change this back to tiger. Let's run this code and look at the result. Okay, so kind of funky, right? We have you're a tiger, but then we also have the best animal and then all done. I probably should have matched our other example there, because if you expected to also see this, you can probably realize that that's not happening because of a break. So let's trace this code. We're asking to switch on tiger. Is tiger equal to tiger? Yes, it is. So we execute this code. But there's no break here. So we just keep running the code down. We hit these cases, we kind of ignore them, and then we execute the best animal. But now we hit a break on line 13. Okay, so we actually break out and then we jump to all done, right? But not until after we printed the best animal. So if I also comment out line 13, which is our break, I'd like you to think what will happen now. Okay, let me run this. Look at that. So now we get everything printed out, right? Which is definitely not what we want probably in most cases. Okay, so the break allows us to jump out of the entire switch block, which is this block right here, right? From everything after this curly bracket after the actual switch check. If we don't have a break, we just fall through to every other case until we either hit a break or hit the end of the switch block. Okay. So important behavior to know. You can use this to your advantage in some ways. However, I would highly not recommend that. I think the fall through cases kind of like this are definitely useful to know. Sometimes falling through can be useful. This is kind of a bit of a holdover from other languages like C, for example, that do that this way. Many other languages handle their switch cases this way. It works the same way in JavaScript. Make sure you put a break in all of your cases and then kind of remove them if you feel you need them in the cases where you need to fall through and match on multiple different strings or multiple different numbers, for example. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Since this is a bit of a confusing topic, I've also made a series of exercises for this where we go much more in depth and see some practical examples of how this might work. So I hope you found this valuable. I know it was kind of confusing. There was quite a lot to the switch statement, probably more than you expected. So if you did find it useful, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. As I mentioned in the next video, we're going to go through more exercises and practical scenarios where this might come up. But in the future, when we get to things like React or other kind of frameworks, we'll actually see this pop up much more than you might initially expect. Okay. So super excited to get to those exercises. I'll see you in that video.